The Book of Common Prayer seems to be popping up everywhere lately. Hello, everyone. Sometime during 2022, in my period of convalescence, one morning, in the wee hours of the morning, I received a text from my stepfather, a man that I often refer to in my channel, and sometimes I call him my dad or my pop. I think I'm just going to stick with dad from this point on. He certainly earned the title. My dad texted me in the wee hours of the morning, as I said, and asked if I was following the Queen's funeral broadcast service, which I had been sleeping and was not, but he said he had been following it and following along in his Book of Common Prayer. He is a late, recent, that is, devotee of the prayer book, and we will often text back and forth questions, or if he found one that's particularly interesting in his flea market travels, etc. But he asked if I were watching because he found it interesting to follow along in his common prayer, which I then grabbed my prayer book in the wee hours of the morning and began to follow along the tail end as well. But I believe there's a large group of people, probably measuring in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, that were experiencing the Book of Common Prayer for the first time during that broadcast. Now, the words of the burial service, as found in the Book of Common Prayer, would be largely familiar to those of us who are of a certain age and grew up in the church and have lost a certain number of loved ones, because the funeral service that we heard when I was a youth and in some settings among some folks is still unchanged or very recognizable from the prayer book service. I also lately came across a bit from the Book of Common Prayer in a place that was unexpected. When I was a teenager, my parents bought me this trilogy, the Space Trilogy, the quote-unquote Space Trilogy of C.S. Lewis. And they're in kind of rough shape. I've had them, as I said, since I was a teenager, and I've read them many times. The third, final book, the biggest, is one that it took me a long time to really get. I didn't get it as a teenager and as a young adult, but it's become my favorite of the three, That Hideous Strength. And there's at the very beginning of the book, it actually opens with a quotation. Let's see if we can see that. Matrimony was ordained thirdly, said Jane Studdock to herself, for the mutual society, help, and comfort that the one ought to have of the other. She had not been to church since her school days until she went there 6 months ago to be married, and the words of the service had stuck in her mind. C.S. Lewis, of course, an Anglican, we sometimes forget. He seems to be the common property of all Christians. In fact, I think from listening to Catholic radio, he's the Anglican that is most quoted by Catholics, in the same way that Chesterton is the Catholic that's most quoted by Protestants, it seems. But that I did not realize at the time, and not until I became acquainted with the Book of Common Prayer, that phrase, that little section, came from the Book of Common Prayer, and that one running theme in this book, which has multiple levels and multiple subplots, but one common theme is the institution of marriage. But I won't give away too much of that if you haven't read it. do, because it's excellent. You don't have to have read the first two books to appreciate it. But led me to think the funeral service for the Queen, and just thinking about the services in the prayer book, these occasional services, the burial of the dead, matrimony. Which, by the way, can I find that? He was ordained for the mutual society, help and comfort that the one ought to have of the other, both in prosperity and adversity. So there you go, right from the prayer book. So these services, excuse me, used to be familiar to Christians the world over, especially those that were descended from the Anglican tradition. Not that I want to take a morbid turn here, but I've made it quite clear to my wife and to my children, who are now adults, that when I finally pass from this life, there are a few things they need to remember, and we've gone over them to make sure they have been drilled properly. One, closed casket. That's non-negotiable. And two, maybe they're hearing this for the first time, but I doubt it, I would like my burial service to be the burial service from the 1662 prayer book. Now, I've taken some steps recently to ensure that that will be the case, because I have made a gift to my pastor. We have a relatively new pastor at my church, Nazarene pastor. I've made a gift of a new copy of the 1662 Book of Common Prayer to him just lately, and he was a good sport about it. So I'll give him a while to hang on to it before I ask him if I should happen to pass while he is leading our congregation. That's what I'd like him to do. So he might familiarize himself with it. He hopefully has some time in that regard. Anyway, just wonder if you have an experience in seeing things from the Book of Common Prayer in your day-to-day life. It used to be more universally recognizable, less so now. And when it does pop up in the culture at large, it's not recognized usually as coming from common prayer. Anyway, that's the thoughts for today. I appreciate you watching. Hope to see you here again next time.